Welcome to More Than a Few Words. This is your host, Lorraine Ball, and I am so excited to do another What Went Wrong. And this time, Stephen Lewis is back in my guest chair. And you may have heard Stephen's conversations about ChatGPT back in February. And if not, you want to grab that link because there's lots to learn. But today, we're going to talk about a rule that I think Stephen broke that I think is a really important one. I always told my team, you can make mistakes, just don't make the same one twice. And Stephen, I think you did.
I did. I made the same mistake twice. I started two businesses I should never have started. Two whole businesses.
Well, I am so glad you're here to kind of share that misadventure and what you learned. Let's start with what businesses did you start and what was wrong with them?
Well, both businesses were excellent business ideas if I had started them probably each time about 15 years later. So the first business I got into was developing websites in 1994. To put that into context for your younger listeners, I only knew one other person with an email address around about that time. Quite literally, it was like being the only guy in the village with a telephone, right? Or only two guys in the village had a telephone, and if they weren't calling each other. So I would contact people, try to sell websites to businesses. We'd have probably about an hour. They'd listen because the internet was really new and quite interesting. Mm-hmm. And then they'd say, well, thanks, Stephen, but we've got an ad in the yellow pages. And that's, you think I'm even joking. People think I'm making that up, but that is what they said. I've got an ad in the yellow pages. And then they'd say, but while I've still got you, we've heard of this thing called email. What's that? And that was where I was at. And it wasn't until 2010, 16 years later, that 50% of businesses had websites. Mm-hmm. So I was so early selling the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. And I realized what I should have been selling. So that's the mistake, and that's the lesson I took from it, is that they loved those 1 hour sales pitches because they were learning something. I should have been teaching the internet, like what is the web, what is email, not trying to sell flying cars to people who, thought bicycles were the cutting edge.
That I'm laughing because I remember 1994, and I remember I was still in my corporate days, and we had two interoffice communication systems, a long form email and 160 character note app. That basically was what Twitter became. And the funniest thing was my bosses abused Twitter. I'm sorry, my bosses abused the note app just the way people abuse Twitter, where they would do run-on tweets. They would do run-on notes. So The habit started early and stayed with. But okay, so you realized that starting a web hosting business in 1994 was not a great idea. And then you did it again?
In 2004, so 10 years later, I'd had 10 years to forget. So in the meantime, I became a journalist and I wrote a lot about technology. I taught people about the internet through technology columns. 2004, I'd moved from Hong Kong, where I started the web business, to Sydney, where I am now. And I started, 2004, a social media agency. To put that into context, Twitter, which I shall always call it, didn't start until 2006. When Twitter started in 2006, 2 years later, people think tweet is the natural verb for Twitter or the natural noun for what you produce. That wasn't settled for well over a year. So I was 2 years before people had even, one, got access to Twitter, two, worked out what to call the thing that they sent. So Facebook had started in 2004, but you couldn't get an account if you weren't in a US university. So I couldn't offer people any Facebook social media style stuff because You couldn't get it. So
Mm-mm.
social media in 2004 was podcasting, blogs, and wikis. And I can assure you, nobody wanted any of those things from an agency.
No, people did not. People did not get what any of that was. I mean, I was running an agency back then, and I was the postcard queen. I had stumbled on email by then. By 2004, I had figured out that email was pretty cool, but I hadn't made the connection between email and blogs yet, and I certainly hadn't made it for my clients. So, if you could go back, what would you do differently?
If I could go back, I would understand my ideal client better, which sounds so trite. So what I'm doing now is I build chief marketing officers, CMOs for people trained on their businesses that give them the kind of advice I would have wanted, right? So
Mhm.
essentially, I built one for myself, and then I thought, this really works, that you can turn ChatGPT into a strategic advisor if you
Mhm.
train it properly, which is what I do. So what I would be doing if I went back would be saying, what are the problems that my audience actually has, before I decided the solution was the cool thing that I liked, because I taught myself to build websites. I thought that was really cool. I
Mhm.
taught myself podcasting in 2004. I mean, can you imagine? That was pre-iPhone. People are
Mhm.
like, what's a podcast? How do I get one? We were like tinfoil people, those of us making podcasts. But people still Serial, which is the podcast everybody says, oh yeah, Serial really, that's when podcasting
Mhm.
started. That was 2016. That was 12 years later. People are like, I've had a podcast for a very long time. I started in 2020. I'm like, I started in 2004. So, don't tell me you got there early. I got there too early. So what I'd be doing is looking at what are my clients' problems. So if I go back, not as far as 1994, because who can remember what people's problems were? That life was black and white. Like who knows, right? There was no color. 2004, they had internal problems, engaging employees, talking to employees, communicating with employees. That's internal to larger companies. Small businesses had problems reaching their customers, getting their message out. That's where I should have started. Okay, you've got a problem with explaining yourself to people and keeping people up to date on what's happening in your business. How can I help you with that? And maybe social media is part of that, and maybe it isn't. I should have looked at the problem. And that's what my AI CMO does for me all the time. I come up with an idea and it says, yeah, but your ideal client is Rachel. Rachel's not ready to hear that yet. Rachel doesn't think that's a problem. That might be a problem Rachel has. Like, I was right. People needed websites. I was right that people needed to understand social media, but I talked about it in the wrong way too soon, not attaching it to a problem that my ideal client knew that they had. And that's, I mean, I can tell you about other mistakes, Lorraine, which was like I wrote a course on how to do your own PR,
Mhm.
but people don't wake up in the morning saying, do you know what I need to do? I need to run my own PR. That's what I
No.
need. That's Tuesday, you know?
It's I always say that what you were trying to do, that kind of, I know this is going to be good for you. I know this is going to solve your problem. It's like trying to get a little kid to eat broccoli. It's good for them, but if you can't put ranch dressing or cheese on it, they are not going to eat it. And you just hadn't figured out the ranch dressing and the cheese.
That's right. I mean, that is exactly right. I mean, now what I teach people is you've got to sell to the symptoms of the problem. Like, you might be a genius that you've worked out the problem. And the example I give people is podiatry, because I used to be in a networking group with a podiatrist. And he said, you need to send me people with knee problems. And we'd all instinctively say, why would you send somebody to a foot doctor for a knee problem? And he's like, yeah, they think the problem is their knees, but it's actually because their feet are wonky that it's
Mhm.
blowing out their knees. And you're like, ah. So Somebody talks about a knee problem, you refer them to the foot doctor. And for all of our businesses, you've got to work out what's the knee problem that people are talking about, because you are
Mhm.
wasting your time talking about feet to people with sore knees.
Yes.
So that's where you need to be. And so everything I do now is about building systems that stop my clients making the stupid mistakes that I made. Essentially, that is what I'm doing.
Fantastic. Well, Stephen, as always, this has been an absolute delight. I'm going to encourage anybody, if you are curious about how Stephen is using AI to do some of the strategic thinking and get out ahead of his clients' needs, you want to hop over to Taleist, TALEIST.agency, and learn more about him. Stephen, thanks again for being a part of the show.
Thanks, Lorraine. It's been not a joyful trip down memory lane, but a cathartic, perhaps, trip down memory lane.
Well, I'm happy that I could give you a little catharsis. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, if you'd like to find other candid conversations with marketing professionals about what went right and what went wrong, be sure to subscribe to More Than a Few Words wherever you listen to podcasts. This has been another episode of More Than a Few Words. Thanks for listening.